Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are talking about the FTDs disappearing, the 45 trillion exposure, how many shares shorts needs to cover, and many more in this video. First, we take a look at this, the red show threshold list. This list should be renamed to the crime washing list because we've seen that AMC spent over 50 days on this list, reaching 50 million fails to deliver, which suddenly disappeared with zero price movement to the upside, where you guys can clearly obviously see for AMC. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is that it's obviously not just with AMC. When Ape was released, we obviously saw what happened with the Ape shares, and we've seen this with GME. But it's to talk about how they use FTDs to obviously find ways to manipulate and suppress the price. And it's becoming to a point where it's being too big for them to try and cover up, because what we can see that again, SEC fails to deliver the FTD list again. They need more time to erase and reset failures to deliver, because the FTD situation has obviously gotten out of control. We are seeing countless amounts of companies with countless amounts of shares not being settled. And that itself is obviously having a harmful impact on these companies. We've obviously seen what happened with MMTLP, and now AMC and GME is obviously experiencing the same, but the difference is that we obviously are able to fight back against it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we are faced with unfair manipulation. And if you want to deep dive into this even further, you can see it here. Does anyone find it odd that on Jan 13th, when there was $8.4 billion worth of trade errors flagged in the CAT system, the SEC said that there were zero reported FTDs on GME the same day? So this is what we talked about. Now, both these news we have covered in the past. The first bit of news is obviously seeing that just in 2 days, there were over $10 billion worth of trade error. And in one particular day, there was 8.4 billion. And the same obviously for GME, where we saw that there was zero FTDs. So clearly there is something going on. Now, I want to obviously link it together, but there are of course other factors involved. But the fact that it's always something always happens and it involves AMC or involves GME is becoming a lot more common now, to the point where we really have to question, is it AMC, is it GME that's causing a massive disruption in the market? Now, what's even more important is the fact we don't see the FTD list again. And in our yesterday's video, we actually talked about how they didn't report the CAT system data. There was an error in the CAT system data. And this is obviously weeks after they said that they are going to put the CAT system on a diet. So previously, we had FTD issues with GME on the very same day where we saw 8.4 billion trade error. Now, as we're seeing that they are not delivering the FTD list again, we're also seeing the CAT data having errors. We're seeing them putting the CAT system on a diet. So you can clearly see that something is going on right now. Now, FTD has always highlighted a major issue, is the fact that these shares have used plenty of times by the short sellers, and that they are harming companies and they haven't settled. And the list just gets bigger and bigger. The amount of FTD just gets bigger and bigger. And we talked about is that yes, they can reset it. Yes, they can try and make it look like it's disappeared. But what's not changed is the fact that it still exists and that they have to cover it at one point. And it seemingly looks like we're becoming closer and closer towards that point. You can also see a big reason for why they're obviously worried. Firstly, we can see Goldman Sachs reported 558.25 billion in assets, 45.88 trillion in derivatives, and 92.68 in total credit exposure in the fourth quarter of 2024. So when you look at in terms of how much money is involved in the market, and that firstly we have to understand Goldman Sachs obviously is someone who's been constantly spoofing AMC, someone who's a short seller of AMC. They are in an overall leverage position. I want to highlight that this isn't all about AMC and GME. They obviously don't have 45.88 trillion worth of AMC positions. But what it is highlighting is the fact that they have a position that in total that are worth 45.88 trillion when they only have 558 billion in assets. Now that should already tell you just how over leveraged they are. Now on top of that, when you're extremely over leveraged, you have to make sure that your risk management is pinpoint precise. You have to make sure that any signs of massive losses of positions that are extremely toxic and that could easily blow up your capital, your liquidity, needs to be stopped. But in this case, obviously for AMC, they haven't got rid of it because they're trapped in this play. And so the thing that we are talking about is that whilst not all 45.88 trillion is involved about AMC, involved about GME, what we have to understand is that AMC and GME does, however, have the ability to get rid of this 45.88, to get rid of their 558 billion asset. And that's what these institutions are worried. And that's why they constantly try to suppress AMC and GME. You can also see here, this is an example of when they are worried about a share going up, when they are worried about a squeeze, and then the manipulation they use to obviously try and get rid of it. And remember this, while we talked about if the shorts can get out of some positions very easily, they won't use these tactics. It's the very fact that they can't, so that they have to use these tactics to, or rather exploit the retail. So you can see here, MMTLP fiasco article claims that Anderson Firm requested 10 million shares from NextBridge Hydrocarbons multiple times. The 2.65 million shares acknowledged by FINRA and SEC as the aggregate short position in MBH post U3 hold, where we obviously talked about how they have used these synthetic shares. And you have to understand that the companies that were involved and has been issued a subpoena include Citadel, Virtue, DTCC, FINRA, NASDAQ, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, and TradeStation. So you obviously understand how when we talk about the institutions that are involved, it's not just one, it's multiple. And you have to understand is that when you look at it for this case, Anderson needs 10 million shares. How many shares do these other short sellers need to exit? Obviously, we're highlighting this, the likes of Citadel, Virtue, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, and others. And so when we look at MMTLP, and we already understand that this is how much they need, and then you understand that there are other firms involved, you can then understand the situation that's going on with AMC, with GME, and that why they are worried. You can see at 2.5 years, U3 hold is protecting them from short squeeze and massive losses. So this is what we said in terms of what they resort to when they understand that through the fair way they can't get out, and so they have to obviously resort to exploiting the retail investors. You can also see that makes 9 when they're ordered by the bankruptcy court to sit for examination and produce documents, obviously like what we talked about, but this will obviously clear it up. And I want to talk about that whilst we obviously looked at this, it's about understanding that some of the other ones in terms of subpoenas issued and examinations ordered are all the ones we've just mentioned. So you can obviously see how serious this situation is, but how multiple firms and not just one is involved when it comes to things like this. Now, we just talked about how Goldman Sachs alone have a massive derivative positions. The reason why we started with Goldman Sachs is obviously because they are the short sellers of AMC. And when it comes to some others, we know that Citibank is also involved. Bank of America is also involved. Now, the reason why I started with Goldman Sachs is because Goldman Sachs is someone that has been constantly spoofing AMC. And spoofing is a way of suppressing the price of AMC. Now, there's others like Citibank, which we've seen that they have actual synthetic shares of AMC, the Brazilian ADL shares. These are for people who have been here for a long time. They obviously know about that. Bank of America, whilst they don't have any direct relationship with AMC short positions, what they do have is they are the prime lender of Citadel. And so Citadel is obviously able to get a large amount of capital. And so you can see how Bank of America does have ties with the short positions of AMC. But when you take a look at their total credit exposure, when you just take a look at their total derivatives, what you're looking at is massive amount. So all these 5 firms that I mentioned, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, they are all over leveraged. And you can take a look from here. We are seeing Goldman Sachs extreme leverage with only 558 billion, but yet they have a $45 trillion position. JP Morgan with 3.4 trillion assets, but has a 47 trillion position. So you can obviously understand how they are all extremely over leveraged. Now, the lowest one here, Wells Fargo, coming in at 5th, also still have a 13 trillion position, and they come together at 186. So this is why shorts always are trying to protect themselves, why the institutions are trying to protect themselves, because they have so much money involved that they understand AMC is the last straw. And so they can't actually afford to have this happen. But what we are seeing right now is that they're failing to actually contain it, and that we are starting to actually win these battles. And that's what they are worried. And you guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.